Hey everybody, this is Max. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are here for the De'Anthony Melton interview, that is at the end of this podcast. It starts at about 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 30 seconds in. Yes, David and I, as we do, went long. So if you want to skip to De'Anthony, we understand. Again, that is at the 1 hour, 4 minute, and 30 second mark. Thanks and enjoy the podcast.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Perry, to Gar. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Shazam! Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. One more time. He got it! Shazam! Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less, a podcast about the NBA and the Phoenix Suns. My name is Max McCulley, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. His name is David Nash. David, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Max. We weren't sure if we were going to jump on a pod this week, but the Suns just keep on making moves and giving us something to talk about. And, of course, you also had an opportunity come up that was too good to ignore.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore the opportunity to interview an actual NBA player, David. We all just want to be NBA players. I talked to one. It was cool.
You did.
And he was awesome. De'Anthony was great. I highly recommend giving it a listen. But David, you had a chance to listen to a draft of it. What did you think?
I did. It was a great little pod for my commute home, unedited version I got. So I'm looking forward to everyone having a chance to listen to it a little bit later in this show as well and let us know their thoughts. But I really enjoyed it. I could tell you were very excited to do the interview, which I'm sure the listeners will hear as well. And I remember chuckling a few times on my train ride home. So I think the people are really going to enjoy this one, Max.
Yeah, everyone knows that I love De'Anthony Melton, and I think that probably did come through. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about kind of our off-season thoughts, sort of wrap up the off-season by going through each of the deals the Suns made. Some of the more recent ones we haven't discussed at all, so we'll kind of go into depth on those.
Yep.
For the deals we've already done to death, we've come up with some other fun things to talk about because no one wants to hear us evaluate the things we've talked about 100 times.
And we don't want to talk about them again either.
No, we really don't. We're gonna rate them, I guess, David. You warned me about. We're gonna rate everything, but we're not gonna reassess every single thing. So before we get to that, David, how about a recap of what's happened recently?
Yeah, as you said, we're going to cover off the whole offseason because it feels like everything is close to done, at least with this Suns roster, but starting in reverse this time because there was technically 5 official deals this week since the last time we did a podcast, Max, but we're going to push Callie to the next section here. So we'll start first with our little recap here and go a little bit in depth as we go through. So the first one, Max, was Tariq Owens signed a 1-year vet minimum deal and what they call an Exhibit 10 with the Phoenix Suns, which for anyone listening, the Exhibit 10 essentially is a summer contract, gives the Suns an option to make it a 2-way deal. It also gives them a chance to have his rights for the Naz Suns as well, Max. And if he plays really well in training camp and something opens up, he could still be on the main roster at that vet minimum deal, Max.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So it's sort of an inside joke between me and you. I don't think anybody else in the world cared. Was like, what was this Owens deal that was reported?
Yes.
And I thought maybe it'd be a 2-way. It turns out it may be a little less than that. The really random CBA deal that you were referring to, that like 0.0001% of the population knows about. It's interesting. I think it's the right kind of guy you want. You want athletic power forward.
Yep.
The issue being they also signed somebody we're about to get to. On that, who does the same kind of thing. So
yep.
A bit redundant, but hey, it's the thing they really need. Take as many shots as you can to find it. I understand it. It's a fine deal, I think, right?
Yeah, probably the only other issue is he's 24 years old. He's another one of those 5-year college players. So, when you're taking a flyer on a guy like this, and if he is going to eventually be the next 2-way option, there's always that argument, which there's been around pretty much all the Suns rookies this summer, is like, how much improvement do they actually have in them? We've talked a little bit about Owens before, but he's a, shot blocking, may be able to become an eventual stretch big in the NBA. That's what he's probably going to be spending time this summer trying to prove, and then probably in the G League, whether it's for the Suns or other teams, he'll be trying to prove that he can be a bit more of a stretch option in the NBA. But a little nerd cast encore here get with this Exhibit 10 deal, Max. They can give him up to a $50,000 bonus with this Exhibit 10 that doesn't count against the cap. And of course, two-way deals don't count against the cap as well. So anyone who's been listening to us on this pod or on Twitter knows that we're very much over the cap now and only using exceptions, but this deal for Owens doesn't count against the salary cap and can go a few different ways, as I mentioned before. But probably the only other thing to mention there is that the Suns have 16 guys plus Harper, who we'll get to in a minute, on a two-way deal. So that's two more bodies, I think, plus one two-way that they can eventually have, because you can hold up to 20 roster spots in the summer before having to cull that before the start of the season, Max.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think you're probably the only person in the world who cares about how they fill that up, but I'm excited to hear you talk about it, because, David, nothing makes me happier than your enthusiasm over fringe basketball players.
Well, let's jump to the ratings, as you mentioned at the top here. This is a tricky one to start off with, but probably gives me a little bit more breathing room to give you where I'm coming from with this. So there's been a lot of comments this week and last week about, how national media is rating the Suns at the moment, off-season grades and things like that. So I thought we'd kind of take a bird's eye view of all these deals in isolation and kind of rate them one by one out of 10, which will eventually give us both a score out of 100 at the end of the podcast here, Max. So I want you to rate each one in the context of the move itself, because I think what the national media are doing, other than just being lazy, is my problem with grades, which I think I mentioned on our crossover pod last week, is that, people try and grade, say, the Suns versus the Golden State Warriors, and you're just not playing in the same field. So more in the context of this move and what other options they had with this move entirely. So Owens is a pretty tricky one to start with, but what would you give the Owens rating out of 10?
I mean, it's the kind of guy they needed to sign, I think. It really fits the MO of James Jones, bringing in guys who are older, more established, ready to play. Even though it's a 1% chance he becomes something, as most of these deals are, is at least the right, category of player. So I guess I'm going to give it an 8.
Yep. All right. I went with a 7 for pretty much the similar reason. So we'll see how we differ in grading these ones as we go, because we're pretty much on the same page here. I think just the age factor counts against him for me. And we should probably say he was on the Summer League roster, but he was injured, which was kind of disappointing, or else we might be a little bit more excited about this one. I watched him a little bit in college because he played on Jarrett Culver's team, obviously, with Texas Tech. But yeah, a bit of a flyer there, but we can probably move on to the other guy that you alluded to before, which was probably the most surprising one that we didn't know was coming when it was announced, and that was Cheick Diallo, Max.
Yeah, and Cheick Diallo, I think, here's why I like that signing a lot for the Suns. The Suns have relied a lot over the past half decade on totally unproven guys in the draft they've gotten at these sort of backup spots. And the problem when you do that is, there's the argument that you have the upside with them, but at the same time, the upside doesn't help you now at all.
Yep.
You bring in a guy with upside and he just sucks entirely and can lose you a game or a quarter or whatever. Cheick Diallo's played in the league a few years now. We know he's not like a complete and total disaster when he's on the court. He has some upside. He's an athletic player. He actually had sort of rosier prospects coming out of college than he's kind of shown in the NBA, so there's still a little more upside there with him, I think.
Yep.
And he also, even though he's been a pretty bad offensive player so far, I think he barely passes. I think he's passed 3 or 4 times in his entire career, and he somehow still turns the ball over at a pretty bad rate. So that's not great. But defensively and athletically, he's good, and that's really what the Suns needed, especially in the second unit. So it makes a lot of sense. Although Ali, who's been on this podcast before, Alessandro Cozzi has said that he thinks Diallo will start.
Wow.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but we'll see. It's an interesting prediction. It wouldn't totally shock me if they decided they needed that next to Ayton eventually, which is probably where Ali's coming from. But I think it's good. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's not it's not a get you to the playoffs kind of move.
Yeah.
But it is like a stabilization on the back end of the rotation kind of move.
Yeah, I love the move because we were harping on about the athleticism kind of point with some of these bigs in Saric and Frank, who we'll get to in a minute as well. So it definitely fills that hole. He's 6'9" with a 7'4" wingspan, 2-year deal with that team option, which I love the flexibility of and why I rated this one quite highly, which we'll get to in a minute. But, I just think that it's an interesting one with he and Frank, who I said, we'll talk about in a minute, because you probably slot them both in at power forward, as you mentioned there with Ali. Would, I guess, slot him in at power forward starting next to Ayton for his rim protection. But, I actually think that him and Frank might both be best suited as fives in the NBA, and that's kind of where they play their best basketball. So I'll be really interested to watch that from both Kaminsky and Diallo's point of view. If you watch Diallo at the Pelicans, he played some with Anthony Davis, who, this week said he loves to be a 4, and, he out of the dunker spot or, rolling to the basket in pick and roll is kind of where he's the most effective on offense. So that's going to be interesting for me from a fit standpoint. Hard to see him getting many minutes at the 5 exclusively. So not entirely sure what the Suns are thinking there with this move, if they are thinking he's a power forward as well as Frank, when, I think they might both actually be centers in the NBA. But another interesting kind of did you know fact for you here, Max. You can look up this one later, or the listeners might want to look it up as they're listening. But go to check Diallo's basketball reference page and go to his per 36 numbers. He is a per 36 machine. I think kind of 15.5 points per game, 13.2 rebounds, 1.3 blocks. But a huge growth in field goal percentage over the 3 years. But other than that, look at the 3 years he's been in the NBA and his per 36 numbers and how identical they are on all 3 years, depending on what varying minutes he played in each of those seasons. It's pretty ridiculous how close all the stats are.
James Jones really wants consistency, David. That's what he wants. He wants people to bring it the same exact thing every single night, even if it's mediocre. But I'll point out, though, not only the field goal percentage, which I think is an outdated stat, so do a lot of people, although less for bigs. True shooting, too. I mean, rookie year, 0.51, went up to 0.62. He had a 0.644 true shooting last year, which, although his offensive advanced metrics are still terrible because of how much he turns the ball over and does not pass.
Yeah,
it's still nice to see he's efficient around the rim. I think that's kind of what the Suns need, that athletic finisher guy. So overall, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm ready for my rating of the move if you're ready for me to give it.
I'll throw a question at you first, and then you can go straight into your rating after that to justify, I guess, your rating here. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson or Check Diallo on the same deal?
Check Diallo. I know people love Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, I think in large part because a lot of you are U of A fans, but that dude is really, 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 really bad on offense, man. Really bad.
Yeah. All right, your rating then.
I mean, if we're really just looking into this in terms of what their options were, and what the realistic possible plan could have been.
Yep.
I'm giving it a 10. I think. I think it makes a lot of sense for them, David.
Alrighty, I've got it at a 9 because I love that team option, and as you pointed out, it's pretty much the best option here at July 20 days into free agency. There's not a lot left if you look at the current free agents out there, so they filled a real need. And it's a kind of upside play here, having that team option in the second year. So I went with a 9. I do have a 10 a little later, my only 10, but you've gone early with a 10 out of 10, Max.
I'm an easy grader, I guess. It's just easy to get A's out of me.
All right, before we go to Frank, there was one other one in the middle there. Jared Harper, 2-way deal, as we mentioned before. What are your first thoughts on that one, Max?
I think James Jones loves his competitiveness.
Yep.
Probably fell in love with him during the tournament, I would guess. And I get it. I watched him with the upset to get to the Final Four, and I loved it too. Mm-hmm. So James and I probably watched the same thing. I think there's now a glut of guards in this roster, which we'll probably get to.
Yes.
Which this cause. So I don't think it makes a ton of sense for the roster. And I wouldn't have done this. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But, James loves his competitiveness.
Yeah, and James even said that, I think, in one of the courtside games at Summer League. They asked him about Harper, and that was pretty much what he said, Max, is he loves his competitiveness and, the fact that he's won at every level or been good at every level that he's played despite his 5'11" stature. So I went back and looked at his Summer League stats, though. I think maybe I thought he was a little bit better than he ended up being, Max. I think, 10.5 points per game, only shot 37.5% from the field, 31% from three, and had 2.5 assists to 1 turnover per game as well. So I don't know what it was. He didn't play a little bit towards the end there. It was really those first couple of games where he popped, but his stats kind of weren't as good as I remembered him being at Summer League. And he had pretty poor field goal percentage in college as well. So just not sure he's ever going to overcome that, because it's not like he's super efficient as a small guy in college, and then the question mark is, can he continue it in the NBA? He's kind of just never been efficient at the rim or in the paint as a small guy, and so therefore that's going to be the biggest challenge for him. But you mentioned the glut of point guards there. I think this deal in particular, we can talk about the glut of point guards a bit later for the roster, but I think the criticism around the Harper two-way has been a little over the top, because it is just a two-way at the end of the day, and I don't think we have to go too over the top in adding him to the list of point guards on the current roster, Max.
No, I totally agree, but here's the thing. I just checked Yellen about 10, and Tariq Owens, I think, like an 8.
Yep.
So in this context of this interesting ranking system we've decided to come up with, I'm going to give this a 2, I think.
Whoa.
She said, I don't think it makes any sense, really. Because here's the thing. I think it would be kind of dumb of the Suns to keep Harper on the team and get rid of Okobo.
Yeah.
I think they're kind of similar, except for Okobo just has a lot more upside to be a lot better than him in a lot of different ways.
Yep.
So I think if that's sort of what might happen out of this, and by the way, I think that might be what happens here. I think Okobo might be on the way out.
I think you might be right.
If we're in this grading system where I'm only in this world where I'm not comparing to the rest of the NBA, I'm only comparing every transaction compared to what they could have done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this makes any sense. I'm giving it a 2 instead of a 1. Just because I agree with James Jones. I liked how he played in that one game.
Well, I've given it a 7. I've been a little bit more
willing
to give them credit for this one. I think it's a
Wait, David. Okay, wait, before you go on, can I say, everyone listening, can you not go on Twitter and cite our ratings on this? Because obviously we're in a weird zone here, and the context will be lost on Twitter.
Yes, this is really an exercise that hopefully we get to the end with a unbiased overall grade for the Suns offseason. That's all we're really trying to do here, guys. So don't pick apart it too much. And I had the advantage of thinking about this a little more. We're not doing a Did You Know segment this week, so I'm putting Max on the spot throughout the whole podcast.
You always have to, David. You can't get through a podcast without doing that.
But yeah, I think it's a worthwhile gamble. I think he's probably the only other traditional initiator on the roster now other than Ricky Rubio. A lot of people talk about all the point guards on the roster, but there's actually not that many traditional point guards. There's a lot of combo guards on this roster. So the league's still trying to work out what to do with these two ways as well, because they're quite new. So every team's attacking them a little bit differently based on where they are in the league as well. So thinking ahead, if things went bad and you needed one of your two-way guys to come in and be able to run the second unit or something, I think Harper would be, capable of doing that, and therefore I'm willing to give him a little bit of a chop out on my rating. And the only other thing I would say is that he looked really good with LeCue, and if this move is made for LeCue's development somewhat, and not putting him out as the sole initiator with the Naz Suns, then I kind of like it from that standpoint too.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Okobo, upside-wise, makes more sense than Jared Harper. But if the plan is to have Jared Harper play with Jalen LeCue and Northern Arizona Suns, like you said, that makes a lot of sense to me. That and also that would, you might have actually landed exactly where James Jones is thinking. Maybe the Jared Harper sighting is much less about Jared Harper and much more about Jalen LeCue. That's obviously taking the most silver lining approach of all time on this.
Yes.
But hey, I like doing that, David. That's awesome. That's a good shout.
All right, speaking of taking silver linings, should we go to Frank Kaminsky, Max?
Yes, let's get into silver lining theater. Also, before we start, this is a trigger warning for U of A fans. If you go and skip 5 minutes ahead in the podcast, we won't blame you. But go ahead, David.
Go ahead. But yeah, 2 year with the room exception, 4.7 first year, 5 million, almost flat for the second year. And the team option, we knew about this deal for quite a while. I think even July 1, maybe it got announced by Woj or someone, but official and the team option official this week, which is why we're talking about it now, Max.
Yeah, I don't think it was July 1, but it was soon after. It was like July 3 or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
But first of all, I'll give you credit. You had a prediction on this being a team option ahead of everybody else. And I think it really helps the deal a lot. I think Kaminsky was not a 2 years, $10 million guaranteed player. He just wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think everyone rightly criticized the deal with that in mind. I think that everyone maybe jumped the gun because, we don't know what these contracts are when they're first reported a lot of times. Because a lot of times it's the agent who gets to decide what the deal is reported as. And the agent is incentivized to help his client seem better, which, hey, more power to you. That's what agents should be doing. I'm a lawyer. I understand how that works. But this really does make the deal a lot better because we can escape it if he's awful. If this is a total disaster, the lack of athleticism is a real killer. The shooting doesn't keep up from the end of last year. Fine, no problem. We say goodbye. But if he does either meet the deal or exceed it, like say he's just awesome. He shoots 40+% from three. He just makes a lot of sense. Maybe he's a backup 5 even. Hey, guess what? We have him on a value deal next season. So I think it helps a lot. I mean, still, I think it was not the right guy to go after with the room exception. There were other guys I would have preferred to get, even knowing that we have a team option on this. So I'm not going to give it a great grade. I'll let you go first, David, on the grading. But the team option has definitely improved my grade. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I'd probably double down on my Diallo point, and you kind of touched on it there. He may end up being a backup 5 on this team, and I guess having the option to find out, and then if you can't afford Baines next year and Kaminsky works out more as a backup 5, then you've got the option to bring him back on a similar deal to what Baines is on right now this year as the backup 5. But that's going to be interesting to watch, is where he does slot in. We'll get to some rotation stuff later. I think there are definitely some question marks about where he and some others can get playing time. Suns Twitter loves a nickname and obsessed with him. I'm obsessed with him, as you know, Max. So I'm going to start calling Kaminsky team option from now on as my nickname for him. Hopefully, people will get the humor in that. But I think your other point before I get to my rating on what else they could have done is why my rating's a little bit lower for someone like Frank versus the other 3 that we've rated so far. I've got some names here for guys that went for less than room level money. Cornette, 2 years to the Bulls. I wouldn't have minded. You can break the room exception up as well. You don't have to give it to everyone. Vonleh, I know for 1 year is one that you would have liked.
Yep.
David Nwaba went 2 years on the veteran minimum to Brooklyn. Jake Layman went 3 years in a sign and trade to the Wolves, but that 3-year figure that he got was pretty close to what we're paying Kaminsky over 2 years. So that was one that they could have got in on. Ed Davis got 2 years, and Jermichael Green may have wanted to go back to the Clippers on a contender, but he got the full room mid-level at 2 years as well, Max. So that's why I have Kaminsky rated as a 6 here. The team option helped the rating out a little bit, as you mentioned.
You're so much nicer than I am, David. First, I'm going to point out I agree with you on a lot of those, especially Vonleh, which I voiced.
Yep.
I have a hard time penalizing the Suns for Jermichael Green and Ed Davis because it's the same amount of money. I think maybe even totally guaranteed for teams that are just better and better situations than the Suns, probably. So I don't think the Suns probably had an option there. But for Noah Vonleh, it's hard for me to imagine Noah Vonleh wouldn't have passed or wouldn't have taken what the Suns offered Frank Kaminsky.
Yeah,
I think that probably has more to do with James Jones's whole. I really am obsessed with the character side of things
and shooting. Find the shooting.
I think that he really thought and shooting. Yes, I think Kaminsky really fits exactly what James Jones is looking for with this team, which fine. I think I would have had this deal around like a 2 or a 1 before the team option came out. With that coming out, it makes it much less painful. I still don't think that he really fits what the Suns needed. I mean, they have Aaron Baines already to play the backup 5, which I think is Kaminsky's better role.
Agreed.
And then they have Cam Johnson still to play, who's kind of similar in some ways to Kaminsky. I think he's better, but similar. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to me from that perspective. So I think I'm going to give it I'll go for a 4. How about that?
All right. We've got you down as a 4. And probably before we move on, I think I touched on expiring money. Now that this is a team option, and you mentioned that before, we can get off it next year, which essentially makes it an expiring max. So Tyler at 19, Baines at 5, Frank at almost 5, Saric at 3.5, and Check Diallo with that team option almost being expiring is 1.6 as well. So that's $34.3 million in expirings the team is going into this season with, Max.
That's not a bad situation to be in. So they are over the cap because of Oubre, though. So do you have it in front of you how much cap space they could reasonably be expected to have if they decline all free agent cap holds next season?
I don't have it on me, but I have looked at it a fair bit, so I should hopefully be able to go off the top of my head here. So I would say that they can still get to around $30 million in max cap space if they wanted to completely clear the books. But I'd say the more realistic number is probably around 15 for next offseason, Max.
And you know what? Next offseason, we've gone over this a million times, it's not an exciting free agency.
Yep.
I think there's an opportunity to possibly grab a fit for the Suns in that offseason. If that's how they decide to go, if they decide to preserve their cap space for 2021, that might be the better path. But the flexibility is the key point. You want to be able to have the option to jump into 2020 free agency if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about Dario Saric. They've definitely got options around him and that power forward position. But before we do that, Max, I think we should go to our next segment, which we're essentially wrapping up 3 moves in our Suns free agency segment here, starting with the recently inked Kelly Oubre, 2 years, $30 million declining. And I'm going to ask you for your rating straight off the top here because we're not going to talk specifically about Kelly and the deal because we already did that last episode.
10. It's a 10.
Woo!
I didn't think about this before it happened, the 2-year idea, but it makes so much sense. I think it's the best possible solution to the Kelly Oubre restricted free agency situation.
Yep.
Because obviously he came in and enchanted Suns fans, is the way I'd put it. In fact, you'll hear later in the Melton interview when I asked him, because we asked him, spoiler alert, about who his favorite Suns teammate would be. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned maybe Oubre, and he's like, that's the fans' favorite. And it's totally true. The fans love Kelly Oubre. And so I think there has been a little bit of overrating of him because of that.
Yeah.
But this is perfect because he got paid a lot of money, but it's not in a way that will cripple the Suns financially, really in any way. So I love it. I think it's perfect. I think we brought him back. I think he's happy because he's making plenty of money. I think he's perfectly suited to evaluate with this team. Like, is his energy really going to be worth it? Is he going to improve? Is he going to realize his all-star upside? Or is he going to, figure out how to be more of a role player? It's exactly the right amount of time I want to have Oubre on this team, David.
Yep, and I'm really glad you ended with that. I'll go to my rating. I said an 8. Maybe I was a little harsh. There's some trends here. I'm kind of sitting a little bit more in the middle, and you're going... you're penalizing for the bad deals and going really, really good for the good ones, which is
I'm going nuts,
an interesting way to look at it. Probably says more about you and I, particularly as people, more than anything, I think, Max. But, I made a Rudy Gay comp during the week about Kelly Oubre, and I won't go into that too much. People can go check it out on my Twitter if they want to look at all the stats that I brought up. Essentially looked at 4th-year guys around 6'7" or taller that had the stats that Kelly had with Phoenix in 40 or so games last year, and Rudy Gay came up, I think, as the closest comp for me. And you mentioned there, like, you might get his upside, or he might decide that he's, happy in his role as a role player, and that's kind of happened in Rudy Gay's career. I think they gave him a 5-year extension at the time.
Yep.
Quite a lot of money. I think it was about $13 million it started with, but the cap was only half of what it is now. I think it was 58 million or something off the top of my head. So quite a large portion of the cap, and they were still hoping that he was going to be the franchise guy at the time, I think. And now the Rudy Gay that we're seeing at the Spurs is probably more in line with what we hope Kelly Oubre is on that team. Is that doing him too much of a disservice to say that, Max?
No, not at all. I think if Oubre can figure out how to be Spurs Rudy Gay now and get to that role player mindset while he still has his young 23, 24-year-old athleticism, that would pretty much be ideal. I mean, I guess ideal would be Oubre becoming an all-star.
Yes.
But that 10% outcome aside, ideal would be him getting into that Rudy Gay Spurs role where he's really developed himself into like a really helpful player for the Spurs. If he can do that now, that would be optimal. I guess the last point I want to make too is that the other thing that's great about this deal, and I didn't mention this, is that if Oubre just doesn't work out at all and just awful, he's not a star, and he also doesn't embrace his role,
Yep.
The Suns can get out of that pretty quick.
And it's another expiring, not this
Yes.
season, but going into the next one and into the
Which is the more important one.
the big off season where they
Yep.
I guess, structuring up to have a lot of cap space before Ayton and Bridges have their extensions. So,
Just like the rest of the league, David.
but yeah, I think that. You're probably right with your 10 because for those points that we're making, that's why this deal in particular and the context of it, rather than looking at the context of what other people around the league got and things like that, is, yeah, they nailed it. It's a perfect deal. You can find out whether he's going to be that star or that role player and happy role player, and then I guess pay him accordingly in a couple of years' time. But probably the big thing to discuss here is Mikal versus Oubre. And it's a nice segue, I think, into that because it all really depends on what Kelly thinks he can be on this team about whether you would start him over Mikal Bridges in the starting lineup, Max.
Yeah, I actually sort of changed my take on this lately.
You have?
I was initially a you got to start Mikal guy. Mm-hmm. And now, and a thing, this is more about the fact that it's just overrated who technically starts the game. And I understand why Kelly Oubre would want to start the game because it's important to be labeled as an NBA starter.
Yep.
So my idea is to have Oubre start the game and then pull him out at early on the 8-minute mark maybe.
Yep.
Whatever the first sub is, generally 7 to 8 minutes. And you bring in Mikal then, let Mikal play with the starters. Then you bring back Oubre kind of when you're subbing in for Booker and everybody else. When you're bringing in Tyler Johnson, for example, that whole the bench wave, and then Oubre plays with them. I think that solves a lot of the concerns that people like Kel and Olsen and Kevin Zimmerman have expressed on the Empire of the Suns podcast, where there's just not a lot of scoring and athleticism on the second unit. And really, Oubre is going to be your second best scorer probably next season. I mean, we'll see. Hopefully it's Ayton, but in terms of like an affirmative, I'm going to take over score, it's probably going to be Oubre if I had to make a guess. So to have that in the bench unit is probably more important than having it in the starting unit. So I think it's kind of like a have your cake and eat it too sort of approach. Start Oubre, but really focus more on having him play with the bench.
Yeah, Max, I don't think you did this on purpose, but you just spoke about Kelly Oubre leading the bench wave for the Phoenix Suns.
I love it. It's perfect.
Love it. We got another nickname for the bench mob next season, I think, if they go down that route. And I happen to agree with you. I'm a little bit sad because this is one that we used to butt heads on, and you've kind of come back around.
We only have so many things we fight on, David. It's sad when we lose one.
Exactly. I thought we might go into this one coming from opposite angles, but we really agree. So I can probably just touch on a couple of points and then we can move on. Monty mentioned at Summer League in one of the press conferences that the 1, the 2, and the 5 are essentially set and the other spots are open, which I love going into training camp. Mm-hmm. And Kelly even mentioned in his press conference, I think, that he was going into camp to battle for his spot. And Monty loved that answer and said as much on the microphone after Kelly answered that one. So I think ultimately, Saric and Oubre win out, but I'm loving going into camp with this new competitiveness that this roster has brought out, and we'll get into a bit of that later with the rotation, but keep it open for all three of those guys to win out on the 2 spots. And then the other point that you made is it really doesn't matter who starts. A lot of the time it actually matters who finishes, and I think Mikal Bridges will be finishing a lot of games for the Phoenix Suns in due time. And I made a point during the week. I was speaking with 2 good friends of this show, Ali and Zona, who have been on the pod before, and I actually want to see some offensive switches out late in games where Booker can actually play with a 5-out offense, and that might even mean that Ayton is benched sometimes. How good would it be if Ayton's actually being brought on for defense, Max, if you were taking timeouts to switch offense and defense? But we spoke before about Frank being maybe more of a backup 5, and Booker has the highest foul rate in the entire NBA in ISO situations. So if there's times where they need a bucket to win a game, 5 out is probably not a bad idea, and that might mean that we see Saric, Oubre, and Bridges all on the floor sometimes and just surrounding Booker with all those shooters that James Jones has compiled, Max.
I don't think we can rule out literally anything, because I think that this front office's and this coach's perspective is going to be, listen, we had this past half decade where we forced our coaches to play these bad players.
Yes.
And we forced these rotations. Not anymore. This rotation is going to be, I think it's going to be safe to say, an entire meritocracy. Mm-hmm. Like if Ayton's awful, he'll probably still play. That might be like the only thing that would be the exception to it. I guess Booker too, but Booker's not going to be totally awful.
Yep.
Ayton probably won't either, but it's possible. But other than that, it's going to be a meritocracy. Whoever the best player is going to play. If Kaminsky's the best player on the team, guess what? He's going to play 40 minutes a game. Sorry, U of A fans. Like, that's how this is going to go. And I, for one, am very excited for it. They're going to operate like a real NBA team for once.
I love it. And I think that's a great segue into our next section, which happens to be the Ricky Rubio signing. But again, we have done that one to death. So we're going to jump into something that I think you want to discuss here, Max. But before we do, I need a rating for Ricky Rubio, please, at 3 years, $51 million.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm going to give it a 7.
Okay.
They really needed to get a point guard. It was very obvious. Everyone knew it. Although it seems like national media has forgotten it. Was it the perfect possible fit of all time? No, it really wasn't. Was Rubio worth $17 million a year? Probably not. That's why this is a 7, not a 10. But they're the Phoenix Suns. They're not the Golden State Warriors. They don't pick and choose who they want to bring on. Mm-hmm. And they found themselves somebody who is like the quintessential NBA point guard, as we've mentioned a few times. He's only 28. He's not like over the hill totally. I've talked about his miles before. That is a real concern. But he is a guy in his prime who is a great point guard. And if the Phoenix Suns had to overpay a little bit to get that, to make sure that their team is stabilized, I think that's okay. And if NBA writers want to give Fs to this because the Suns, I guess, had Brandon Knight and Eric Bledsoe at one point 5 years ago, then sure, give us an F for it. But all I'm looking at is next season, and Rubio is going to help tremendously. Not in the least bit because he puts Tyler Johnson as our sixth man and third guard, which is just a huge upgrade in itself. So overall, what Rubio did to the guard rotation for me is at least a 7, and I'm giving it a 7 because of the possible overpay and the less than ideal fit.
And I've given it an 8, and I don't need to say anything else other than that, Max, because you nailed all of my thoughts on the Rubio signing. So we can jump into the 538 discussion that I think you wanted to have, Max.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the stats are backing up what you and I have been saying, and not what the angry national media hate the Suns. Not angry, I would say more mocking. National media has said about the Suns, and then also maybe more the negative Suns commenters. The Suns obviously improved. It's just blatantly. It's right there. You see people say the Suns, I can't find out what their plan was. Are they even better? These are actual quotes from national writers. Guys, their plan was to get better right away so that Ayton and Booker's careers weren't wasted. And even the advanced stats of all things, which have been the bane of Suns fans' existence over the past few years, are showing the same thing. Not only, as you cited, 538 had us with 35 wins, which is far above, I think, what even most positive Suns fans are saying.
Agreed.
No friend of Suns fans, Andy Bailey, ranked on Forbes the teams in terms of the wins above replacement WAR difference between last season and this season. The Suns were 6th in the entire NBA between last season and this season in terms of how much their WAR changed. So, and that's above, the Jazz were, way low, and they had a great offseason according to everybody else, which I agree with, by the way, but making my point here. The Suns had a good offseason in terms of making their team better. Did they lose some value on some trades? Yes. Did they maybe not make all the best draft picks? I think so. We'll see. But in terms of just making sure this team is going to be better next year and making sure Ayton and Booker aren't surrounded by just a pile of trash, this offseason was a very, 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 very large success.
Yep. I agree, and we'll get to that with our final ratings at the end here, I think. But I'm a little gun shy. A few people have asked me on, Twitter and things of a win prediction. The last 2 years, I've mocked the Vegas over/under on the Suns and been horribly wrong. And I think our last season predictions for wins were pretty bad and maybe a little bit misguided, Max, because I thought, we thought they were going to do a few more things before we gave those win predictions. So I don't know if they can get to 35, but here's what I do know, Max. The returning guys are all upgrades because of either their youth or their new role. So Booker, Ayton, Kelly, and McHale should all improve because they're young enough to do so. and Tyler is a downgraded role, so he's an improvement in that role as well. The new guys, Rubio's far better than anything that we had at point guard in 18-19. Saric is obviously going to be better than Dragan Bender, and I think Baines is going to be better than Holmes in that role, although I'm sure that's maybe the one that a lot of people might disagree with. And then after that 8-man rotation, Frank's probably better than anyone else who played at a big man position last year on the team. Virtually anyone on the court is going to be better than Josh Jackson, who we're about to get to in a minute, Max. And, the collection of Diallo and rookies who are likely to not play very much anyway are probably better than the other bit part players on last year's team as well. So I'm not convinced that there's one single position, 1 through 15 on this roster that isn't in a better spot this year than last year. So, I don't think it was a 19-win team overall anyway, because I think a few things happened to the point where it was probably more of a 25-ish win team roster last year. So that's a 10-win leap based on 538, which isn't totally crazy, although they probably could have just signed Terry Rozier and got those 10 extra wins, Max.
Oh, God. Jesus Christ. I can't believe the Charlotte Hornets. But hold on, I do want to focus on a couple of things you just said, though, because I think it's really interesting. So, as you kind of pointed out, this does not factor in at all improvement from Booker, Ayton, and Mikal, and Oubre. Mm-hmm. In fact, I don't think it factors in Oubre or Tyler Johnson at all. I think they are already included in the last roster.
Yes.
So, that doesn't even factor in, which is a huge part of this. And yes, we will get on to the Josh Jackson, De'Anthony Melton trade, which, man, I really wanted to give Melton props for the fact that he was traded as the total prize to dump a number 4 overall pick from just a few years ago. I couldn't put it quite that way because I just thought that was kind of a rude thing to do, but yeah, that is what happened.
All right, well, shall we go on to Jackson and Melton then and get your rating straight off the top? I was a 5, but based on how these ratings are going, I'm guessing you might be a little less than that, Max.
Easy 1. Clear 1 for me. Cause there were so many other ways they could have done this.
Yep.
And I think, so I'm going to get that out of the way. It was a 1. I think it was a horrible trade. To me, it makes no sense. If I was in that front office, I think there were 20 different ways I would have pursued that same exact thing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think that it has really colored. Particularly, I went after Zach Lowe, who was my favorite person in the NBA. I love him as an analyst. I think he's the best. But I still went after him because I think he was just wrong to frame the entire offseason through this one trade.
Yep.
Because, yes, I know that this trade was to clear up cap space to sign Rubio, and they had to get rid of De'Anthony Melton, who I obviously love, and also some draft capital to do it. First of all, they could have done it a different way. They could have just stretched Josh Jackson.
Yes.
And at the same time, it doesn't mean all the moves prior were bad moves, just because they had somewhat of a cause in creating this move to happen. I think that's just bad analysis. So while I'm giving this move a 1, I am not attributing that. I'm not using that 1 to make every other move before it a lesser grade, as I think some analysts are doing.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I looked at this a little bit more simply. I gave it a 10 out of 10 for having the balls to get off Jackson because I think that maybe the previous GM, for instance, wouldn't have done that. And then I, essentially split it in half because they should have stretched instead of making this trade, in my opinion. So maybe I gave them too much credit for just having the balls to get off Jackson.
Can I argue with you a little bit here, David?
Yeah, sure.
I think if they had true balls, they would have just stretched him. I think part of the reason why they didn't do that is because they didn't want to be seen as cutting the number 4 overall pick from 2 years ago. That's an embarrassing thing to do. Mm-hmm. At least if it's in a trade, they can argue they like Javon Carter or whatever they want to argue. I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue into our question here. And is Javon Carter going to stick on this roster? Because there's varying opinions on this. I genuinely think that he was just a throw-in because Memphis actually have a bit of a roster crunch going on. So he was probably the least wanted guy that they were just willing to offload the other way. I think you do make a good point about there being somewhat of a prize for the Suns coming back the other way, so they weren't slammed too much, but it probably didn't work because the national media piled it on anyway. But I should say the opposite point to that is that Jones did reference him and not Ali Okobo on a radio interview this week. So maybe they are thinking that he's going to stick over Okobo, who you alluded to earlier on in the show might be done in Phoenix. But what's your opinion on Carter sticking on this roster, Max?
I think they're going to give him a chance.
Yeah.
I think half cynically because they want to make the trade look better. But I think also the other half being, listen, there is some to like about Javon Carter. You and I identified it last year when we talked about him as part of our draft podcast. The dude is a really, really good one-on-one defender. Absolutely, he is. We had both hoped maybe his offense would have translated a little better to the NBA. It was, in a word, terrible last season, and it's hard to see him going from that bad of an offensive season to even reasonable offensively. So I'm not high on him, but I understand why James Jones, especially given his affinity for competitive players, which Javon Carter is, I'm not surprised that he would want to give him a chance, and even not even dishonestly just for the trade reason, but also have some sort of honest feeling that Javon Carter might be a good player.
Yeah, and I think at the end of your bench in those kind of 13, 14, 15 spots, you either want developing players or specialists. And whilst Carter maybe can't develop into much more of a player, particularly over someone like De'Anthony Melton, who we both loved upside-wise, he is a specialist that you might be able to throw out there when a point guard's killing you or whatever and just be a bulldog on defense. So, but I think, if Ali is traded for a player, I think you and I have both noted that maybe backup shooting guard or something is still an open spot on this depth chart. And then someone like Tariq Owens is awesome in training camp. I do think that there's a chance with all the point guards on this roster that Carter is cut before the start of the season.
Oh, it's absolutely possible, particularly given the fact that they signed LeQ, and LeQ looked good. And I think we're getting to him next probably, so I won't totally ruin that segment. But there's just a lot of guards here, and I think Javon Carter, he'll get a chance because of the trade, obviously. But he's gonna have to really show something very quickly to stick.
Yep, you are playing this podcast like Ricky Rubio as a table-setting point guard, Max, because we're jumping into the draft section of this podcast now and starting with Jalen LeQ. So we discussed his Summer League play on last episode, so again, not one that we need to go in too much on his actual play and what type of player he is, but another opportunity to get a little nerdy real quick, Max, and it's a 4-year, $6.1 million deal that has the first 2 years guaranteed, the third year is a non-guarantee, which the team decides on that, and the fourth year is a team option. And that's important, that team option in the last year, because, Max, you spoke last episode about him being, a bit of a lottery ticket, no risk, high reward if he hits, and you get 3 years control to find that out. You then can decline the fourth year option and make him a restricted free agent. Nikola Jokic is an example of someone that had that happen to them recently as a second round pick. And then you can lock him up again with literally zero risk of losing him. You're in total control there. Even if someone offers him a lot of money, you can match it. So for that reason, he is my sole 10 out of 10, Max.
I am not in a position to disagree with you because I totally agree. In fact, if I could, I'd probably give him a 15. I would like to lower the previous ratings to make him the obvious 10, because if you're signing an undrafted free agent after the draft, like, what are your expectations? They're usually going to be pretty low, especially on a 19-year-old point guard with athleticism. Like, usually you expect that guy to suck.
Yes.
At basketball right away. And Jalen LeQ doesn't suck at basketball.
Most of our second-round picks have sucked at basketball recently, Max.
God. Remember when Ryan McDonough drafted Davon Reed 32 overall? Remember that?
Man. Alec Peters.
Jalen LeQ is a better pick than all of them, and he wasn't even a pick.
Correct.
I think it's such an... this is the most obvious 10 ever for me on this rating scale, just if you're just judging based on what they could have done. It seems that they very clearly paved the way for him to not get drafted and to get to this deal.
Yep.
Brendan Clean, when we did our crossover podcast, sort of alluded to Jalen LeQ mentioning that.
He did.
I think that's what happened, and guess what? That's just a stroke of genius. Because it seems like James Jones is based on what his idea of the players he wants needs to be players who are sort of good at basketball, kind of. Mm-hmm. And Jalen McHugh fits that mold totally. Not only is he athletic, as everyone's been raving about, he takes charges. He plays team defense. He actually does the little things, and as a player of his type, that is incredibly rare. And it gives me all the kind of hope in the world that he could actually be something. Again, still a lottery ticket, but given he's undrafted and given he has all those qualities, it's an easy 10 out of 10 for me.
Yep, and we should just touch on again, like you did at the top, don't come at us with these ratings. We're not giving it a 10 out of 10 because we think he's a surefire all-star in the future in the NBA. It's the fact that the context of this deal and how they got him, it's a 10 out of 10 deal for what other options that they had. And they've got 4 years now on the lowest you can pay someone in the NBA to find out if he can be a great player in the league in the future. So I was a 10, you were a 10. We very much agree on that one, which moves us to the trade around Aaron Baines and Ty Jerome, which I'm going to give you the floor on this one, Max, but straight up, tell me who won the trade and what's your grade for this deal?
So this is one where I'm going to cite the Dunked On podcast here because I as much criticism as they get, I do think they're really good at assessing just pure asset value.
Yep.
I don't think they're as good at player evaluation, but I think they're good at that. And they thought the Suns won this trade pretty easily, and so do I. And the key reason why is that it's the time value of money. It's a basic economic concept that applies to the NBA too. Draft picks now are worth more than draft picks later. Mm-hmm. That's just how the value of assets works in the world. And the Suns basically got, you can argue over where the Bucks pick will be next year, but it'll probably be worse, but maybe about the same as the pick that the Celtics gave the Suns this year, number 24 overall. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're getting number 24 this year rather than probably worse than that next year, and you're also getting a player who is viewed by almost everybody as being on a good deal. Aaron Baines is a backup center. Some people would rather have kept Holmes, but that's sort of beside the point because they made the same amount of money.
Yep.
A good player on a good deal, and you got a better draft asset. It's kind of like the most clear win you could possibly have on a trade. So I'm confused by the reaction that I've seen where that could possibly be a loss. I think it's only viewed as a loss because of sort of the rest of the Suns offseason, which I want to touch on a little more with the next thing we're going to talk about.
Yep.
But I'm going to give it a 10. I'm going to give it a 10, David. Another 10 for me.
Love it. I absolutely love it. I gave it an 8 just because I'm not as high on Ty Jerome as you are. And even with this deal and the next one, I would have taken different people with the draft slot that they got. But I agree with all of your points. So again, you have managed to be able to let me just give my rating and essentially move on. But before we do jump to that last 10th transaction or combo of transactions, Max, I thought we'd have a little roster exercise in this section because we've talked about Baines and Jerome quite a bit in previous pods. So I'm going to let you analyze and answer some questions here with a roster and a rotation, I should say, that I've kind of come up with for the Suns for next season. You game?
Always dangerous, but I'm in.
All right, so the first slot for me is center, and Baines ties into this. Ayton played 30 minutes last year. What would you like? I say 34 for Ayton.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on his conditioning. I think that was the problem with him last year. But if he can go 34, I'm in. I'd even play him more than that if he's able to.
Yep, and I love that James Jones mentioned the conditioning this week because it was a sign that he actually agreed with a point that I made all last year. So that leaves 14 minutes at backup center, which I'm just giving most nights to Aaron Baines playing that role, 14 minutes at backup center. So we can move on to the second slot. We've spoken about this quite a bit. Kelly played 30 minutes with Phoenix. Do you think that's about right again?
Yes, I do. I think especially because in my view of the Suns, he's going to be a large part of the bench unit and probably closes and starts. He's at least 30 minutes for Kelly.
Yep, which leaves 18 minutes again at backup small forward, which I'm going to give all of those 18 to Mikal Bridges and try and find him some more elsewhere.
Yep.
Which moves us to power forward. As a starter with Philly, Saric played 30 minutes a night. Are you cool with that?
Real quick, I want to point out that I think Kelly Oubre could get some of his minutes at power forward just to be, totally completist here.
Yep.
Sorry, what did Saric have?
30.
Yeah, that's probably about right. Maybe even a little less than that. We'll see. It depends on how well he plays, but About 30 is probably a good average.
And again, that leaves 18 minutes at backup power forward, which we talked about before. I think this is probably the most open and probably going to be down to matchups and form every night. But for now, I'm just going to say, 18 minutes a night to Frank isn't totally out of the question if he's playing well.
Form is key, David, and the other thing I want to mention is injury.
Yes.
Whenever you're doing a hypothetical rotation, you have to keep into account that there will be injuries.
Of course. So the fourth slot here is shooting guard. I want to keep Booker to around 34 a night max. Do you agree?
Depends. Totally depends. If he comes into next season in kick-ass shape, he'll be 23 in October next season, right, David?
Yes.
There's no reason why if he's not in incredible, 8-pack abs, kick-ass basketball player shape, he could play 40 minutes a game. I'd be fine with it. If he's doughy, then no. So it's tough. But as an average, I'll say 36.
All right, so you're going 36, I'm going 34. That leaves between 12 and 14 minutes a night at backup shooting guard. I think Mikal needs to play at least 30 minutes a night, so that's the 12 more minutes here.
Yep.
And James Jones, I believe, has alluded to this through a few people in the media that we might see some Bridges at backup shooting guard. So that gets him up to around 30 and leaves maybe 2 minutes up our sleeves, and Johnson can play 18 minutes a night at backup point guard with a couple more at backup shooting guard as a combo to get him around 20 minutes, which leaves Rubio, who's averaged 30 minutes a night for his whole career, basically, which I think is about right for him too. So that's kind of the rotation I'm looking at here, Max, which is a 9-man rotation every night. But the point here is that it misses a lot of guys. No Ty Jerome, no Cam Johnson, no Check Diallo, or Frank, depending on matchups and things like that. And of course, no Carter, Okobo, or LeCue right now, which is fine too. So especially for those recent draft picks and what we talked about before, being into this idea, there's competition for spots, and we're not going to see everyone every given night, which I think is a great thing, not a bad thing.
I think it's the best thing. It's a meritocracy finally. If you're not going to bring it every night, if you're going to be the guy who doesn't listen to what the coach is saying and doesn't execute the game plan, guess what? You're not going to play. Unless your name's Devin Booker or DeAndre, and then you're playing regardless.
Yep.
But we are kind of tied to those guys anyway, so it doesn't matter what they do. That please be nice, Devin and DeAndre. But yeah, everybody else, listen, you got to show it in training camp, and you got to show it every single day during the season. And I don't care how talented you are at really anything. I don't want to get into a huge philosophical point here.
Yep.
But talent only goes so far. You have to apply yourself. You have to actually try. And the fact that the Suns are finally embracing that, and not living in Ryan McDonough's asset value matrix, I think it's a good thing.
So much more margin for error with this roster, I think, which I love from James Jones, and he's probably not getting enough credit for, with people just taking pot shots at his bad value deals. But you alluded to moving on to the last deal here and having some thoughts on that, so let's do that, Max. Saric and Cam Johnson were part of a trade, and I'm also going to throw the TJ cap clearing trade into this for good measure, just because it leaves us with a round number 10 transactions for the offseason, and they were kind of, announced pretty close to each other on draft day, maybe a couple of hours apart. So if you can think about bringing Saric and Cam Johnson in and trading out the number 6 pick, as well as the TJ move with 32 to clear his space, how would you throw all that together and give it a rating, Max?
Again, I must emphasize, please do not call us out on Twitter for these rankings, because we're literally assigning the same value to this as we assigned to the Tariq Owens deal. So let's not freak out over what David and I did here. But, man, because I think they made a mistake with the Cam Johnson thing, but I also think that they did a great job with the TJ trade and the Cyrus trade in general. You've really put me in a pickle here, David. I guess I just have to set with a 5 because how else? I don't know 4 because Brandon Clark was the fucking Summer League MVP, so let's go 4.
Yeah, I had the same philosophy as you, but ended as a 7. I gave TJ a 9, getting Saric an 8, and then I gave the whole move of not getting Culver, not picking Clark, and instead taking Cam as a 5. So for me, that averaged out at a 7. But philosophically, we were pretty much on the same page there. But as I said, you alluded to it before. What's your thoughts around this one? Not necessarily the players, because we've covered them all quite a bit in the past, but what's your overarching thought here, Max?
I have a pet theory that I've run by you and our friend Chris Koffel, that had the Suns just taken Brandon Clark 11, aside from the fact that I wanted it even, I think it would have been seen as like a trendy, cool pick by NBA media and NBA Twitter and basically everybody, rather than Cam Johnson, which was seen as like a super reach and a crazy dumb pick, and oh my God, what are the Suns doing?
Yep.
And I think not only did it color everyone's analysis of that pick, which obviously it should have. I mean, you should analyze that pick based on what you think it was good or not.
Yep.
But I think it ended up coloring everyone's analysis of the entire offseason. I think had you had them pick Brandon Clark there and he was a Summer League MVP, you'd have people like, national NBA writers saying, oh, wow, they got Rubio as a good starting point guard finally. They took a great pick with Brandon Clark. Oh, they got Ty Jerome. A lot of people love Ty Jerome. Aaron Bates, championship experience. Like, the whole framing of the entire offseason would be different if they had just made one different pick at number 11.
Yep.
I really think that. And I think that's obviously like bad analysis. I mean, if you put it that way, it is. And listen, this is hypothetical. No one knows if what I'm saying is true or not right now. But I think you agree with me. This does kind of feel like what would have happened.
Yeah. And I think we're actually seeing that in how people are looking at the Dario Saric portion of this trade, to bring it back to these deals in particular, because I think I'm seeing a lot of people freaking out that they've backed themselves into some sort of corner for a lose-lose situation. If Dario plays well, we're going to overpay him, and if he doesn't play well, then it was a wasted opportunity. And I think that misses 2 points. If he plays well, we're going to have the chance to pay him his market rate to stay on the Phoenix Suns, and that's not an overpay. That's paying him what he's worth. The only risk would be if you extended him before the season started, which Callan Olsen, our good buddy, brought up the idea of doing in an article this week, which was, I thought, a really interesting look, just, at that being something that can happen this offseason if the Suns chose to do so. I think McD definitely would have looked at that, but James Jones is a bit more of a show me, you kind of deserve it kind of guy. And then the other thing is, I think if it doesn't go all that well, they still found themselves with a starting power forward before free agency even started, and one less thing to worry about. So from that perspective, I think it was a great deal as well. So yeah, I agree with your point overall. I think one pick, one player different would have changed the whole outlook, and that probably rounds out this whole exercise here.
No, you make the best point ever there, David, in terms of how people were framing the Dario Saric thing.
Yeah.
I just want to quote the Yahoo article, which gave the Suns an F for the offseason after saying they're stumbling through it. Here's the quote that they said. In the draft, Jones, referring to James Jones, traded out of the sixth spot for the rights to pay Saric in free agency next summer. Hey, guy, that's not everything. He does play for the Suns this year too. You realize that, right? That's not everything. We just don't get the rights to pay him. It's just, this is the kind of framing thing that makes me really annoyed. It's just, you put 2 seconds of thought into this guy. I can tell you did that, and it's probably your job. But if you're criticized by Suns fans who follow this stuff, like you and me, David, like, almost to a religious extent,
yep,
and you try to jump into Twitter to fight us about it, listen, man, you didn't think about this, so don't fight us on that. That's my last grandstanding point I got to make, David. Go on.
Yeah, I agree, and you're kind of backing up the whole exercise that we've gone through here. I was adding up as you were talking there. You've ended up at 66 out of 100, Max, and I am at 75 out of 100, and I think you gave a B last episode on the crossover with the Locked On guys, and I gave an A. So the interesting thing there is I think on those grades we added in the coach part of it, and we were both positive on that part of it. So, actually going through this exercise, we're pretty consistent with our last episode's answers here, and that was really the point that I wanted to make with this exercise is there's been a lot of commentary around the Suns off-season, but when you look at it in totality, they made some bad moves, they made some really good ones, and overall I think they had a pretty solid off-season, particularly from where they were positioned before July 1 or even June 1.
I totally agree. I would challenge a single Suns fan to say that they're less excited to watch the Suns on game 1 of this season than they were like at any time last season.
Yep.
Like, this team is obviously going to be better. It's going to be more watchable. And listen, did they make giant upside reaching moves? No, not really. Although it's arguable they didn't really have any available to them. But they accomplished the big goal here, and they didn't mortgage the future. They didn't trade Mikal. They didn't trade a future first. They lost some value maybe on De'Anthony Melton, who I do really like and you're about to hear from, and some second-round pick value. And T.J. Warren, to people who like him, yeah, we gave him away. But, like, there's nothing the Suns did this offseason that's, like, in 5 years is going to really, really matter, I don't think, in terms of negative stuff. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they put themselves in a position to have a competitive team, a team that can help Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton develop, which is really all that matters, and they're able to do that without mortgaging the future, that seems like a pretty good use of the offseason to me, David. What do you think?
I think you're bang on again, and I'm going to count that as you reaching your 10th assist here and getting the double-double for the podcast.
Double-double!
Mentioning Melton right there at the end, because we can probably wrap this one up and throw to that segment, Max.
Let's do it. Yeah, thank you, David, for joining. Unfortunately, you couldn't make the next part, but without further ado, here is Grizzlies guard De'Anthony Melton. He is the first human being to both appear on this podcast and play professional basketball. He started 31 games last year at point guard for the Phoenix Suns, and he is now entering his second NBA season as a guard for the Memphis Grizzlies. His name is De'Anthony Melton. De'Anthony, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
I especially appreciate you taking the time to play. I understand you're currently on the way to Memphis. Is that right? Like you're moving right now?
Yeah, I'm getting everything situated with that. I got a move coming up soon, probably the next week or two.
I feel like when trades happen, fans focus immediately on like what the players are going to look like on their new teams and all that stuff. If I were a player, I feel like the first thing I'd think is like, damn it, I have to move in 100-degree weather. That sucks.
I mean, yeah. It does. It's tough, but, you know, you got help with it also. You got people that can. So it's not the worst thing in the world.
And you have experience doing it already, so that helps.
Yeah, of course.
So, De'Anthony, I basically want to spend most of this podcast diving into, like, your entire professional career so far because you can tell me, but from the outside looking in, it kind of seems like it's been an absolute roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the NBA. You know, you never know what's going to happen. You just got to be grateful to be in. You know, what's inside the league, honestly, and that's what I'm trying to grasp right now. You know, get a hold of.
Yeah, it's especially coming fast for you. Most people, I know NBA is a business. Everyone gets thrown around a little bit, but man, just to summarize for the listeners who may not know what's happened to you over the past year and a half. First of all, you were forced to prepare for the NBA draft without a sophomore season because, and this is me speaking, not De'Anthony, idiotic college rules. You then fell way too far in the NBA draft because, and again, this is not De'Anthony, this is me, NBA teams are stupid. You then had a great summer league performance for the Rockets. Then a month later, you got traded to Phoenix anyway, basically because Houston needed to get rid of a different player's salary. You then started the season not playing at all, and then you became the starting point guard. You then had an injury that knocked you out for weeks, and the Suns traded for another point guard in the interim. And then finally, a few weeks ago, you got traded again to the Memphis Grizzlies in another trade that was about clearing another player's salary. D'Anthony, did I miss anything there?
No, that sounded like that was pretty spot on, honestly.
So that's kind of what I want to focus on because, like you said, you're being humble. Like, you know, everyone has a crazy career in the NBA, but yours has been, I think, especially crazy. So let's just dive into it. I want to start kind of near the beginning of that crazy timeline. Again, you were forced to, you know, prepare for the draft without a college season and impress NBA teams without actually playing organized basketball. How do you think that had an effect on you in the draft process? Do you think it affected where you ultimately ended up? And it's kind of what was your mindset at the time?
I'm not sure if it affected me falling in the draft or if I did fall in the draft, but I think around that time my mindset was just, you know, just keep getting better. And I just want to prove NBA teams that, like, I was working on my game from my freshman season to my sophomore year because technically this would have been my sophomore year. So I just wanted to show teams that I was improving my game and I was able to make that, you know, that jump. And my game has evolved from what everybody thought it was to something, you know, that was an NBA caliber point guard. And that's what I wanted to show. And I felt like I had a good job of showing that, but also not having enough game film, you know, that could be a reason why I did fall, but I'm just glad the Houston Rockets, you know, they gave me the opportunity. And then once I got my opportunity, I just, you know, every second I got, I just, you know, made the most of it.
Yeah, you really did. And we'll get to that in a second. But I want to ask you about something you said. So you said you were trying to show NBA teams you were working on your game. How did you do that? I mean, I know obviously at the Combine and then you had workouts with teams, but was there anything you were doing before that to keep yourself on the radar for NBA teams? Like, I'm sure you probably weren't sending workout videos of yourself to them, but how did you make sure you stayed on the radar?
Well, I was working out with Drew Hanlon, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a few workouts with like teams that came up fits to watch them work out. I had 2 different pro days with ISU basketball and also Drew Hanlon too. So I was just trying to put myself in front of teams as much as possible. They could see me and see the type of player I was.
So ultimately, you ended up going 46 overall to the Houston Rockets. And before I tell you about this community of people who I'm not sure you're aware of, who were shocked by this, who loved you and were surprised, we'll get to that in a second. I want to ask you first, why do you think you fell to 46 overall? If you had to identify a reason, or even if NBA teams told you why.
Honestly, I don't know if I have a real reason because everybody has different opinions on why I was picked at this number. So I just more so looked at it once my name was called. I was just happy for that because not all the best players are taken top 30. So a lot of great players that came out the second round too. So I was just thinking about it like that after my name was called.
Yeah, wasn't Nikola Jokic around there somewhere? I think he's in the 40s.
Yeah. So I think so.
De'Anthony, I want to ask you, do you know what draft Twitter is?
Draft Twitter?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so there's this thing called draft Twitter, which is basically just a bunch of nerds on the internet who have gotten really into analyzing the draft and trying to predict who the best players are going to be from college and international into the NBA. And this group of people absolutely loved you. The most famous website on draft Twitter called The Stepien had you 12th in the draft. One of their top draft nerds named Sean Darenthal, who actually works for an NBA team now, had you 8th. I personally, I'm not part of it really, but I had you 11th. I absolutely loved you for the draft. We all thought you had a great size and feel for the game for a point guard, especially. Given your feel for the game and your size combination and all that stuff the draft Twitter saw, do you think NBA teams just didn't see that? And do you think maybe it's because you weren't playing, you were just in workouts?
I would say that, that could be a reason because workouts are definitely different from actual game tape, game reps. So I could see that being one of the reasons, but I tried not to think about that too much, and I tried to just act like in my workouts these were good reps. Just not get wrapped up in the fact that I didn't play last year because that could affect my mindset and clouded some of the decisions I made.
It didn't really take you long though to show NBA teams that they were pretty wrong to let you fall that far. In summer league for the Rockets, you averaged 16.4 points, 7.2 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals per game. Why do you think your game translated so well right away to summer league, even though you were out of organized basketball for so long?
Honestly, I just felt like I was just ready. Like I said, I worked hard on my game. I really studied everything that has to do with, how players play me. And then I just felt like I was just coming to there just having fun. And the Rockets had a lot of faith in me. And they just told me, just go out there and just play and just try to win. So that's what I did. The whole team, we were just trying to win at the end of the day. And I felt like our style of play was really, was really fit. It fit me, and it just fit the team that we had. And so I feel like my team was finding me, and we were just all moving around, and I was having fun, honestly.
So, random question. You said you were having fun, but I have to ask you: is playing in summer league kind of weird? Because I've been there a few times as a fan, and it's kind of weird to be a spectator there. It's just kind of a weird event. It's a bunch of players who are kind of thrown together and never played together before. Is it kind of an odd setting to play in?
I mean, it kind of gives you the taste of the NBA season, honestly, because you got games coming up. Sometimes back to back. Sometimes you got three games in 4 days, or 3 games in 5 days, or something like that. So they're just trying to give you a taste of that. But it's kind of cool how teams come together so quick, and you just got to work on it and just find your chemistry game after game and just try to win.
So let's move on to the first time you were traded. Late last August, you were traded along with Ryan Anderson to Phoenix for Marquise Chris and Brandon Knight. It happened pretty late in the night, right? What were you doing? Where were you? And were you shocked that it happened, or did you see it coming?
It's funny because I was just playing Madden, and then my trainer called me. He just kept calling me, and I was listening to music, so it was kind of I was like, why is he calling me? And then I think I answered his phone, and then I checked my phone, and 2 people texted me yo, Phoenix is lit, Phoenix question mark. And then I checked Twitter, and then it said Ryan Anderson, De'Anthony Melton have been traded.
So that's interesting. So who'd you hear from first and far as a team goes? Did Houston call you eventually, or did Phoenix call you first? Or
Yeah, no, Phoenix definitely called me right after that. So it was nothing. I wasn't like worried too much.
yeah, it sounds like you didn't see it coming then. So did Houston not give you any kind of indication? Because you said, I mean, they seemed like they were really invested in you. And I mean, and to be fair, the trade didn't seem to be about you. It was more about Houston doing salary cap things. But it sounds like they didn't give you any real indication.
No, yeah, I mean, I don't think they really had really too much. I was still a rookie and stuff like that. So
No, yeah, that's definitely the right attitude. It's just interesting to point that out. It's less not to insult Houston. It's just to show more like how crazy the NBA is. Like one moment,
yeah,
you're, like you said, playing Madden, and the next moment you're traded without any kind of notice.
I mean, yeah, when you put it like that.
Hey, well, real quick, what's your Madden team?
My man team, the Vikings. I'm a Viking.
Oh, is it really? Well, you're gonna have to switch to the Cardinals. We got Kyler Murray now, so they're gonna be awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna be a Cardinals fan, but time to change.
So early in the season with the Suns, you didn't play right away, but you got in pretty quickly. I don't know if you remember this or not. You probably do because it was like the first real game of your career. It was the second game you played against the Spurs. But you really made a lot of Suns fans excited because you had a really good defensive performance in particular. In 20 minutes against the Spurs, you had 3 steals, and you really played better defense than, I got to be honest, most Suns fans have seen in like half a decade. Not really a team known for defense. So do you remember that game, and how did you feel after that one?
Man, of course I remember that game. I mean, I was just after the game, I was just like, I was kind of just not shocked, but I was kind of like, well, I really just played my first NBA game, and it was still kind of like crazy to me. Like the next day, that like I was like actually like on the NBA floor and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you played well.
Yeah, That's what I was more so like confused and shocked about.
So, what's the toughest thing about adjusting to the NBA in the first few weeks of play? You mentioned the summer league kind of prepares you for the grind a little bit, but I can't imagine it can prepare you for all the travel and all the games and all of that.
Oh yeah, no, of course not. I mean, like I said, all the stuff they do in summer league is just a stretched out season, honestly. So they just compacted that, and it's just a whole bunch of just summer leagues within the NBA season. So if fans want to know how it is, it's different cities almost every other day. You know what I mean? It's a lot of flying and stuff like that. So if you don't like flying, you better get used to it.
Yeah, that would be really hard to be in the NBA if you don't like flying. So after you began starting games at point guard for the Suns, which didn't happen, it didn't take very long. Like you went from playing to starting in not that much time. How difficult was it to run an NBA offense as a starter, especially Coach Igor famously kind of has one of the more complicated offenses in the NBA? How difficult was that for you as a rookie who was never expected to be starting right away to adjust to basically running a team?
I feel like I was doing a good job, adjusting to it. It was a new coach, and as a new player for him too, because I was traded there.
Mm-hmm.
So they already had, their team and stuff like that. So it's kind of tough for, I feel like for a new coach and a new player. It was my first year and his first year. Just to be able to get it adjusting to each other. But I feel like we did a good job at it and just controlling everything. He really, emphasized controlling the team and taking a team by charge. So I think he helped me with that and being more vocal with stuff.
So another random question for you, De'Anthony. Everyone knows LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. Those guys are all awesome. But who's a dude who you didn't really know much about or only knew a little bit about before you got into the NBA that you played against where you were just like, damn, man, that dude's really, really good at basketball, and I had no idea.
He's really, really good at basketball.
Yeah, someone you didn't really expect because everyone knows LeBron's good. But, like, who's somebody who you're like, wow, I have no idea. I barely knew who that guy was, but he's really good.
Man, I would say I don't even know. That's tough because there's a lot of players that just like surprised me. Like he's really. I would probably say Jamal Murray, honestly.
Interesting. Okay, he just got paid a lot, so I guess he's being paid well enough. I guess.
Yeah. So I'm not shocked by his contract, but what he was doing and just moving around the court and stuff like that, I was like, okay, yeah, he was definitely the real deal.
He could play. So let's fast forward a little bit here because I know you're running out of time. A couple weeks ago, you were traded again, along with Josh Jackson and some second-round draft picks for Javon Carter. How is this trade different or the same from the last one that happened to you? Have you gotten more experience in the league and affected you less, or was it kind of the same deal?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's much different from the first one, but I feel like Memphis just has a lot of like faith in me, and I'm just ready to get started with them. The Suns also did give me a great opportunity. I started my first NBA game there. I had a lot of like milestones there as a rookie,
Sure.
but I'm ready to just move on and just get ready for my sophomore season.
Yeah, it's exciting because it seemed like Memphis really viewed you as like the prize of the trade. Like you were the reason why they made it. It seems like so that's really cool. And you're also joining a team. It's pretty exciting. John Morant's on the team, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark. Do you have any relationships with any of those guys? Like, do you know those guys already?
Yeah. When I was on Summer League, I was out there the whole time, so I got a lot of time with some of the Summer League guys, obviously. But John was there, Jaren, Dylan Brooks, Brandon Clark was obviously playing. Tyus Jones came, Jonas Valanciunas came. So we had a few guys on the team there, and we got to talk to each other and see how everything's going. And
You guys are going to play some defense on that team, man. Tyus, you, Jaren Jackson.
Super.
So a couple more questions. What's the plan for this summer? You mentioned working with Drew Hamlin on your shot. Are you continuing to work on your shot mechanics? What else are you working on?
Just my all-around game, honestly. I like to work on everything, just to say, I have that in my game, and just to keep evolving at not just one thing, just keep evolving as a player.
Yeah, makes sense to me. All right, last thing. My co-host David couldn't join us, so he shot me a few quick questions. We did this thing called 7 seconds or less, where we ask 3 questions of our guests, and they have 7 seconds or less to answer. These should be pretty easy, De'Anthony. You ready for a couple quick questions?
Yeah.
All right, first one. Favorite Suns teammate?
Favorite Suns teammate? That's tough. Everybody.
Everybody. That's a cop-out, man.
Everybody.
You have to give you a one who stands
Everybody.
out. How about Kelly? Everyone seems like Kelly Oubre.
The fans can go with him. Everybody's mine.
The fans do go with him. I'll tell you that. The fans do go with him. Most memorable moment from practice last season?
Most memorable moment when I dunked on my boy that we played against each other in college, George King.
Oh, well, David will love that, my co-host. He's a huge George King guy, so he'll love that. Who is the hardest player that you guarded last season in the NBA who you thought you actually did a pretty good job on?
The hardest player I guarded?
Yeah, the best player, basically. You did a good job on.
I feel like I did a pretty good job on almost everybody, honestly.
I like the answer. That's a good answer.
I'm confident in my defense.
I remember there was one Warriors game where you did a pretty good job mucking things up. You got in like Curry and Clay's space a little bit. So we'll go with that. How about that?
Okay.
It's never a bad thing to stop the Warriors. But De'Anthony, thanks again so much for joining. I know me and many of my listeners will continue rooting for you at Memphis. So good luck, man.
All right. Thank you.